The whistle of the train split the air like a thunderclap, but Yates Caldwell barely heard it. Time had frozen, along with his breath and his heartbeat. Through the billowing steam on Platform 3 of Willow Creek Station, he saw her Josephine Miller. The same golden hair, now pulled back in a neat bun beneath a modest blue hat. The same delicate profile that had haunted his dreams for 12 long years. The mail-order bride stepping down from the westbound train was the girl who had given him his first kiss under the old oak tree when they were both 16. It was 1878, and the Dakota Territory was still wild, untamed land where a man could reinvent himself or lose himself entirely. Yates had done both. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly conscious of the trail dust coating his clothes and the 3-day stubble on his jaw. He'd come to meet his employer's mail-order bride as a courtesy, to escort her safely to the Morgan Ranch where she would meet her husband-to-be. John Morgan was a good man, if somewhat older, who deserved happiness. But Morgan had never mentioned the bride's name, only that she was coming from Ohio. Ohio, Josephine's home. His home, once upon a time. Josephine descended the train steps carefully, her gloved hand accepting the conductor's assistance. She carried a small valise, and her simple traveling dress spoke of practicality rather than fashion. She looked around the bustling platform with wide eyes, searching for someone, the man she had agreed to marry. Yates couldn't move. His boots might as well have been nailed to the wooden planks of the platform. Memories flooded back the sweetness of that first innocent kiss, the promises whispered in the dark, the tears when his family moved west, and then the letter he'd sent that had never received a reply. Josephine turned, and their eyes met across the crowded platform. Her lips parted in shock, the color draining from her face. The valise slipped from her fingers and landed with a thud on the wooden boards. For a heartbeat, neither moved, then the platform supervisor bumped into Yates, breaking the spell. "Pardon me, sir," the man said, tipping his hat before moving on. Yates swallowed hard and forced his legs to carry him forward. Each step felt like a mile as he approached the woman who had once been his whole world. "Josephine," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Yates." Her voice was exactly as he remembered, soft and clear as a mountain stream. I had no idea you would be here." He bent to retrieve her fallen valise. "I work for John Morgan. I came to escort his bride to the ranch." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth, her eyes widened further. "You work for Mr. Morgan, 6 years now. He's a good man." The words came automatically, though he suddenly questioned whether any man was good enough for Josephine. "I see." She looked down at her gloved hands, now twisting nervously together. "This is rather unexpected." A child dashed between them, chasing after a rolling hoop, followed by an exasperated mother. Around them, the station hummed with activity, passengers disembarking, porters hauling luggage, families reuniting. But for Yates, the world had narrowed to this woman and the impossible situation they found themselves in. "I should get you to the ranch. Morgan's expecting you." He gestured toward the street where his wagon waited. "It's about an hour's ride." "Of course." She nodded, composure returning to her features though her eyes remained troubled. "Thank you for coming to meet me." They walked in silence through the station, each step taking them closer to a future neither had imagined. Yates helped her into the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary. He settled her valise behind the seat and climbed up beside her, taking the reins. As they pulled away from the station, leaving the noise and bustle behind, the silence between them grew heavier. The clip-clop of the horses' hooves on the hard-packed dirt road seemed unnaturally loud. "How have you been, Yates?" Josephine finally asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Well enough. The ranch keeps me busy." He kept his eyes on the road. "And you?" "My father passed 3 winters ago." "My mother followed him last spring." She smoothed her skirts. There wasn't much left for me in Riverdale. Riverdale. Their hometown. The place where they'd grown up together, where he'd carved their initials into that oak tree, where they'd planned a future that had evaporated like morning dew. "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, genuinely meaning it. The Millers had been kind people who had welcomed him into their home countless times. Life changes. She looked out at the rolling grassland stretching to the horizon. Sometimes we must change with it. "Is that why you agreed to marry a man you've never met?" The question escaped before he could stop it. She turned to look at him, a flash of the old fire in her eyes. "Is that judgment I hear, Yates Caldwell, from a man who promised to write and then vanished without a trace?" The accusation stung all the more because it wasn't true. "I wrote to you every week for 6 months, Josie. When you never answered, I assumed you'd moved on." Confusion crossed her face. "What are you talking about? I never received any letters from you. Not one." The wagon hit a rut, jostling them both. Yates steadied the horses before responding. "I sent them. I swear it on my life." "Well, I never got them." Her voice softened slightly. "I waited. For so long, I waited." The implication of what she was saying settled over him like a physical weight. Someone had intercepted his letters. Someone had deliberately kept them apart. But who and why? "Your father never approved of me," he said slowly, old suspicions surfacing. Josephine shook her head. "He wouldn't have done that. He was stern, but he wasn't cruel." "Then who?" She had no answer, and they lapsed into silence again. The landscape rolled by gently swelling hills covered in prairie grass, wildflowers nodding in the summer breeze, the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking the course of a creek. In the distance, the dark smudge of the Black Hills rose against the horizon. "Why did you come west?" she asked eventually. "My father heard there was good ranching land to be had. We settled about 30 miles north of here, near the Belle Fourche River." He didn't mention how the land had nearly broken them, how his father had died of pneumonia that first brutal winter, how his mother had remarried a man Yates couldn't abide, prompting him to strike out on his own at 18. "And how did you end up working for Mr. Morgan?" "Luck, I suppose." "I was riding through looking for work. His foreman had just quit. He took a chance on me." Yates adjusted his grip on the reins. "It's been a good arrangement." "He seems kind in his letters," Josephine said, her voice carefully neutral. "Established, reliable." All the things Yates hadn't been at 16. All the things he'd worked to become since. "He is those things," Yates confirmed. "He's also 53 years old and has buried 2 wives already." Josephine's head snapped toward him. "He never mentioned that in his letters." "I'm not surprised." "He's not a man to dwell on the past." Yates hesitated, then added, "The first died in childbirth before I knew him. The second from influenza about 4 years back." "I see." Her hands returned to twisting in her lap. Is there something wrong with the ranch that makes women vulnerable?" "No," Yates answered quickly. "Morgan runs one of the cleanest, safest operations in the territory. It was just bad luck. Life out here can be hard, but it's not usually deadly, at least not anymore." They crested a rise, and the Morgan Ranch came into view in the valley below a sprawling main house of hewn logs. Several outbuildings, corrals, and beyond them, the rolling pastures where cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney, and even from this distance they could see figures moving about, the daily work of the ranch continuing. "It's larger than I expected," Josephine said, studying her future home. "Morgan started with nothing 20 years ago. He's built it all himself." Despite his conflicted feelings, Yates couldn't help but feel pride in the ranch that had become his home. "And what about you, Yates? Do you have a wife waiting, children?" The question was asked lightly, but he could hear the tension underneath. "No." He didn't elaborate on the women he'd courted briefly over the years, none of whom had made him forget his first love. "Ranch life doesn't leave much time for courting." "I see." They were drawing closer to the ranch now. Soon they would arrive, and she would meet her future husband, and whatever this strange interlude was would end. Yates found himself slowing the horses, dragging out these last moments alone with her. "Josie," he said quietly, using the name he'd called her all those years ago. "Are you sure about this? Marrying Morgan?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steady but sad. "I'm 28 years old, Yates, an orphan with no family, no inheritance, no prospects in Riverdale. Mr. Morgan offers security, respect, and a new start." "What else should I be looking for at my age? Love," he wanted to say. "You should be looking for love. The kind we had, the kind I've never found again. Instead," he said, "you deserve happiness." "Happiness is a luxury few can afford," she replied with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll settle for contentment." They had reached the ranch gate. Beyond it lay her new life and the end of any claim he might have had on her heart. "For what it's worth," she added softly as he guided the horses through the gate, "I never forgot you, Yates, not for a single day." Before he could respond, a figure emerged from the main house. John Morgan, dressed in his best shirt, his silver hair neatly combed, a welcoming smile on his weathered face. He'd been watching for them. "Here we are," Yates said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Home." But as he helped Josephine down from the wagon, their hands touching briefly, he knew with sudden, devastating clarity that home wasn't a place. Home was a person, and he just delivered his home into another man's waiting arms. John Morgan stepped forward with a courtly bow that belied his rugged appearance. "Miss Miller, welcome to my home. I hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. It was quite comfortable, and your man was most attentive." Josephine's voice was warm and pleasant, the voice of a woman greeting her future husband, not the voice she had used with Yates. "Caldwell is my best man," Morgan said, clapping Yates on the shoulder. "I knew I could count on him to see you safely here." He turned back to Josephine. "You must be tired. Let me show you to your room. You'll be staying in the guest quarters until the wedding, of course. Mrs. Abernathy, our housekeeper, has prepared everything." As Morgan led Josephine toward the house, she glanced back once at Yates, a look so brief he might have imagined it. Then she was gone, vanished into the house with the man she had come to marry. Yates stood motionless beside the wagon, the reins still in his hand, feeling as though his chest had been hollowed out. He had a sudden, wild urge to leap onto his horse and ride away from the ranch, from the territory, from the knowledge that every day from now on, he would have to watch Josephine build a life with another man. But there was nowhere to run from the truth that had hit him like a physical blow. He had never stopped loving her. And now, it was too late. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed to mock Yates's dark mood. He had barely slept, tossing and turning in his small cabin behind the main house, replaying every moment of his reunion with Josephine. He rose before dawn, as was his habit, and set about his chores with grim determination. Physical labor had always been his refuge, the one thing that could quiet his mind when thoughts became too burdensome. By the time the sun was fully up, he had already fed the horses, checked on a pregnant mare, and begun repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in the last storm. He was hammering with more force than necessary when he sensed someone watching him. He turned to find Josephine standing a few yards away, dressed in a simple day dress of pale green, her hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. She looked rested, though there was a tension around her eyes that hadn't been there in their youth. "Good morning," she said, approaching cautiously. "Mr. Morgan said I might find you out here." Yates set down his hammer. "Is everything all right? Did you need something?" "No, nothing's wrong." "Mrs. Abernathy has been very kind." She glanced back toward the main house. "Mr. Morgan has gone to town on business. He said he'd be back by supper time." Yates nodded, waiting for her to continue, unsure why she had sought him out. Josephine took a deep breath. I couldn't sleep last night, thinking about what you said about the letters you sent that I never received. It bothered me. It still bothers me. It's ancient history now, Yates said, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. Is it? She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. 12 years of misunderstanding and separation, based on what? A cruel interference, a simple mistake. Don't you want to know the truth? He did. God help him, he did. But what good would it do now? What's your theory? He asked, unable to resist the pull of the mystery that had shaped both their lives. I'm not sure, but I've been thinking about Millie Carson. The name hit him like a bucket of cold water. The postmaster's daughter. Yes, she always had feelings for you, Yates. Everyone knew it except you. He frowned, memories rearranging themselves. Millie had always been around, always eager to talk to him, but he'd had eyes only for Josephine. You think she intercepted my letters? Her father was the postmaster. She helped sort the mail. Josephine shrugged. It would have been easy. That's a serious accusation. I know, and maybe I'm wrong, but it would explain a lot, wouldn't it? It would. It would explain the silence that had been so unlike the Josephine he knew. It would explain why he had eventually stopped writing, convinced she wanted nothing more to do with him. It would explain the hollowness that had plagued him for years afterward. It doesn't change anything now, he said, though his heart argued otherwise. Doesn't it? She stepped closer still, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. What if we both made decisions based on a lie? What if we've been living lives that were never meant to be ours, Josie? He shook his head. You're here to marry Morgan. He's a good man who deserves a chance at happiness. And what about what I deserve? There was a flash of spirit in her eyes that reminded him painfully of the girl she had been. What about what you deserve? Before he could answer, a voice called from the direction of the house. Miss Miller, there you are. They both turned to see Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper, waving from the back porch. I need to go, Josephine said, taking a step back. But this conversation isn't over, Yates Caldwell, not by a long shot. She hurried away, leaving him standing by the half-repaired fence, hammer in hand, wondering if the ground beneath his feet had shifted or if it was just his perception that had changed. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Yates tried to keep his distance from Josephine, burying himself in work, volunteering for tasks that took him to the far reaches of the ranch property. But somehow, they kept finding themselves in each other's company at meals, where Morgan insisted his foreman join them. During the daily operations of the ranch, which Josephine showed interest in learning. In the evenings, when Morgan invited Yates to join them on the porch as the heat of the day dissipated. Morgan seemed oblivious to the undercurrents between them, treating Josephine with courtly respect and Yates with the same gruff affection he always had. If anything, he seemed pleased that his bride-to-be and his foreman got along so well. You two must have a lot in common, both being from Ohio, Morgan remarked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Did your towns neighbor each other? Yates and Josephine exchanged a glance. They hadn't told Morgan about their shared past, and now the omission felt dishonest. We actually grew up in the same town, Josephine admitted. Riverdale, Morgan's eyebrows rose. Is that so? What a coincidence. Not really a coincidence, Yates said, deciding honesty was the only path forward. We knew each other growing up. Our families were neighbors. Well, I'll be, Morgan chuckled. Small world indeed. Were you friends then? Another loaded glance. Josephine answered this time. Yes, we were friends, good friends for many years. Until my family moved west when I was 16, Yates added. We lost touch after that. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Morgan seemed satisfied with the explanation, turning the conversation to his plans for expanding the ranch's cattle operation next spring. But later, as Yates was leaving for his cabin, Morgan followed him out. Caldwell, he said, his voice serious in the darkness. "Is there something I should know about you and Miss Miller?" Yates stiffened. "Sir, I'm not blind, son. There's history there that you're not telling me." Morgan's face was hard to read in the dim light from the house windows. "I need to know what I'm walking into." Yates considered his options. He could lie, preserve the peace, protect his job, or he could tell the truth and risk everything. "We were sweethearts once," he said finally. "Young love. It ended when my family moved. We both moved on." Morgan studied him for a long moment. "Have you moved on?" "Yes, sir." The lie tasted bitter. "That was a lifetime ago, and you'd have to ask her that." It was the most honest answer he could give. Morgan nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Caldwell. I won't pretend I'm not concerned, but I trust your integrity." He clapped Yates on the shoulder. "Get some rest. We've got that herd to move tomorrow." As Morgan walked back to the house, Yates stood in the darkness, feeling the weight of his deception. He hadn't told Morgan about the letters, about the misunderstanding that had shaped the last 12 years. He hadn't told him that every time he looked at Josephine, he felt as though he was coming home after a long, cold journey. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. The next day brought unexpected news. As they prepared to move a herd of cattle to the north pasture, a rider came from town with a telegram for Morgan. After reading it, the rancher sought out Yates, who was saddling his horse. "Change of plans," Morgan said, his face grave. "My brother's had an accident in Denver. Broke his leg in 3 places falling from a scaffolding. I need to go to him. He has no one else." "Of course," Yates said immediately. "When do you leave?" "First light tomorrow. I'll take the morning train." Morgan ran a hand through his silver hair. "I hate to ask, but can you oversee things here? It could be a few weeks. You know I will." And Morgan hesitated. "Miss Miller will be here alone with just Mrs. Abernathy for company. I'd appreciate if you'd look out for her as well." Yates felt a knot form in his stomach. Weeks alone with Josephine without Morgan's steadying presence. It was a test he wasn't sure he could pass. "Maybe she should go with you," he suggested. "Denver might be more comfortable for her than the ranch." Morgan shook his head. "My brother's living conditions are rough at best. No place for a lady. Besides, we've already announced the wedding for next month. If she leaves with me now, tongues will wag." He was right, of course. Propriety mattered in these small communities. Morgan's reputation and Josephine's could be damaged by even the appearance of impropriety. "I'll make sure she's safe and comfortable," Yates promised, knowing he was committing himself to weeks of torment. "I know you will." Morgan's trust was a physical weight on Yates's shoulders. "You're a good man, Caldwell. I've always known that." That night, Morgan announced his impending departure at supper. Josephine expressed appropriate concern for his brother and offered to help in any way she could. Mrs. Abernathy, a widow of indeterminate age who had been with the ranch for years, assured Morgan that she would make sure Miss Miller was well looked after. Yates said little, feeling increasingly like a man walking into quicksand with his eyes wide open. The next morning, Yates drove Morgan to the train station in the wagon. As they neared the town, Morgan broke their companionable silence. "I'm leaving a lot in your hands, Caldwell. My ranch, my livelihood, and the woman who will be my wife." He looked straight ahead as he spoke, his profile stoic. "I do so with complete confidence." Yates gripped the reins tighter. "Your trust is not misplaced, sir." Morgan nodded, seemingly satisfied. They completed the journey in silence, and Yates saw his employer onto the eastbound train with a firm handshake and a promise to telegraph if anything required his attention. As the train pulled away, belching steam and smoke, Yates stood on the platform feeling a complicated mix of emotions: concern for Morgan's brother, worry about managing the ranch alone, and a treacherous, unwelcome relief at the temporary reprieve from watching Josephine and Morgan together. He stopped at the general store for supplies before heading back to the ranch. As he was loading sacks of flour and sugar into the wagon, a woman's voice called his name. Yates Caldwell, as I live and breathe. He turned to find a plump, fashionably dressed woman hurrying toward him, a wide smile on her face. It took him a moment to recognize her. "Millie Carson," he said, surprised. "What are you doing in Willow Creek?" "It's Millie Thornton now," she corrected, showing off a wedding ring. "My husband runs the bank here. We moved out last year." She beamed at him. "What a small world. How have you been?" Yates studied her face, trying to reconcile this cheerful matron with the girl Josephine suspected of intercepting his letters. It seemed impossible now. "I've been well. I work at the Morgan Ranch just outside town." "Morgan," Millie's eyebrows rose. "I heard John Morgan was getting married to some mail-order bride from back east. Is that true?" "From Ohio, actually. They're to be married next month." "Well, that's something." Millie adjusted her bonnet. "And what about you? Did you ever marry that Miller girl you were so sweet on?" The direct question caught him off guard. "No," he managed. "We lost touch after I moved away." Millie's expression turned sympathetic. "That's a shame. You two were inseparable. Everyone thought you'd end up together." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Of course, not everyone thought it was a good match. Your parents certainly didn't." Yates frowned. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I shouldn't gossip," but her expression said otherwise. "It's just your mother was quite vocal about it after you left. How she'd saved you from making a terrible mistake, tying yourself to a girl with no prospects or connections." Millie shrugged. "Mothers can be protective that way." Yates felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. "My mother? What did she have to do with anything?" Millie looked uncomfortable now. "I really shouldn't say more. It was all so long ago, Millie." His voice hardened. "What did my mother do?" She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Well, I only know because my father told me. Your mother came to the post office right after you all moved. She told my father that no mail from you should be delivered to the Miller girl. Said it was for your own good, that you needed a clean break." Millie shifted uneasily. "My father didn't like it, but your mother was persuasive. And she was leaving town anyway, so he agreed. And my letters to Josephine, what happened to them? Returned to sender, I suppose. That was the usual procedure." Millie frowned. "But you must have known that. Didn't you get them back?" He hadn't. Which meant his mother had intercepted them at the other end as well. The full scope of the deception made him dizzy. "I need to go," he said abruptly, turning away. "Yates, wait," Millie called after him. "Are you all right? Did I say something wrong?" He didn't answer, just climbed into the wagon and snapped the reins, leaving Millie Thornton staring after him in confusion. His mind raced as he drove back to the ranch. His mother, the woman who had raised him, who had nursed him through childhood illnesses, who had taught him to read and write, had deliberately separated him from the girl he loved, had intercepted his letters, had lied to him by omission for years, had watched him grieve the loss of his first love without ever admitting her role in it. And for what? Because she thought Josephine wasn't good enough. Because she didn't want her son tied down at 16. Whatever her reasons, she had altered the course of 2 lives with her interference. By the time he reached the ranch, a storm was building on the horizon, the sky darkening to the west. It matched his mood perfectly as he unhitched the horses and carried the supplies into the kitchen. Mrs. Abernathy was baking, the warm scent of apple pie filling the room. "There you are," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Was beginning to think you'd run off with the grocery money." "Sorry," he muttered. "Got delayed in town." "Well, you're back now. Miss Miller was asking for you. Said she wanted to discuss something about the garden plot." Mrs. Abernathy gave him a knowing look. "She's out back." Yates found Josephine behind the house, kneeling in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, shielding her eyes against the sun. "You're back," she said, smiling. "Did Mr. Morgan get off all right?" "Yes." He helped her to her feet. Josie, I need to talk to you. I found out something in town today. She must have heard the urgency in his voice because her smile faded. What is it? Has something happened? I ran into Millie Carson Thornton now. She's living in Willow Creek. He took a deep breath. She told me about the letters. It wasn't her that intercepted them. It was my mother. Josephine went very still. Your mother? But why would she do that? She thought you weren't good enough for me. The words tasted like poison. She told the postmaster in Riverdale not to deliver my letters to you, and she must have intercepted your replies if you sent any. If I sent any, Josephine's eyes flashed. I wrote to you every week for over a year, Yates, long after you stopped writing to me. The knowledge that she had tried to reach him, that she hadn't simply forgotten him, hit him like a physical blow. I never got a single one, and I never received yours. Her voice softened. All those years wasted. They stood in silence, absorbing the magnitude of the deception that had shaped their lives. In the distance, thunder rumbled as the storm drew closer. We should go inside, Yates said finally. Storm's coming. Josephine nodded but made no move to leave. What does this change, Yates? I'm still here to marry Mr. Morgan. He's still a good man who deserves loyalty and respect. I know. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But doesn't it matter to you that we were deliberately kept apart, that everything we believed about each other was a lie? Of course it matters. Her composure cracked. It matters so much I can hardly breathe when I think about it. But what can we do? Turn back time. Undo the last 12 years. I made a commitment to Mr. Morgan. I gave my word. To a man you don't love. I respect him. I could grow to love him in time. But her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. And what about us? What about what we had? What we could still have? Yates, don't. She took a step back. Please don't make this harder than it already is. The first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering the dry earth around them. Neither moved. I never stopped loving you, Yates said, the words torn from him. Not for a single day. Josephine's eyes filled with tears. Don't say that. You can't say that to me now. It's the truth. And I think you feel the same way. It doesn't matter what I feel. She was crying openly now, the raindrops mixing with her tears. I made a promise. I have to keep it. The skies opened then, rain pouring down in sheets. In seconds, they were both soaked to the skin. Yates grabbed Josephine's hand and pulled her toward the house. But instead of going to the back door, he led her to the small covered porch of his cabin. They stood dripping on the porch, both breathing hard. Josephine's hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wet ropes down her back. Her dress clung to her, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. You need to get dry, Yates said, opening the door to his cabin. Come in. I'll find you something to change into. She hesitated only briefly before following him inside. The cabin was small but neat, a single room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a chest for his clothes. A shelf held a few books, and his saddle and gear hung on pegs by the door. Yates rummaged in the chest and pulled out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change behind that screen. He nodded toward a folding screen in the corner that he used when bathing. Josephine took the clothes and disappeared behind the screen. Yates quickly stripped off his own wet shirt and replaced it with a dry one, then stoked the small stove to take the chill from the air. Outside, the rain continued to fall in a steady drumbeat on the roof. When Josephine emerged from behind the screen, she was swimming in his clothes, the shirt sleeves rolled up multiple times, the trousers cinched tight with a piece of rope. Her wet clothes were draped over the screen to dry. Despite the circumstances, Yates couldn't help but smile at the sight. What? She asked, self-consciously tugging at the oversized shirt. Nothing. It's just, you look like you did when we went swimming in the creek that summer and you borrowed my shirt afterward. A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. I remember. My mother was scandalized when we came home and I was wearing your clothes. Your father threatened to tan my hide. But he didn't. No, he liked me, I think. He did. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, the only place to sit besides the two hard chairs at the table. He said you had a good heart. Yates sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. I wish I'd known about the letters sooner. I would have come back for you. Would you? She looked at him directly. Even after you thought I'd rejected you, even then. He held her gaze. I've never felt about anyone the way I felt about you, the way I still feel about you. Josephine closed her eyes. Yates, please, I can't do this. I can't betray Mr. Morgan's trust. I know, he sighed heavily. I wouldn't ask you to. He's been good to me, taken me in when I had nothing. I owe him my loyalty. They sat in silence, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. The storm showed no signs of abating. Tell me about your life, Josephine said finally. The years I missed, were you happy? Not at first. My father died that first winter here, pneumonia. My mother remarried within a year a man named Garrick who had a small claim near ours. He was hard, not violent but cold, treated me like a hired hand more than a stepson. Yates stared at the floor as he spoke. I left as soon as I could, worked odd jobs until I found my way here. Morgan gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm sorry about your father, Josephine said softly. He was always kind to me. He liked you, said you had spirit. Yates looked up at her. What about you? These years in Riverdale, quiet, I taught at the school for a while. Helped my mother after my father died. Considered marriage once to the new doctor, but she shrugged. My heart wasn't in it, because of me. He couldn't help asking, partly because he was more in love with the idea of a wife than with me specifically. She gave a small smile. When my mother died, the house went to my cousin. He was kind enough, offered to let me stay on, but I knew I needed to make my own way. That's when I saw Mr. Morgan's advertisement, and you decided to marry a stranger. I decided to start a new life. She met his eyes steadily. I never expected that life to include you. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions. Yates was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way Josephine's damp hair curled against her neck, of the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I should go, she said, standing abruptly. Mrs. Abernathy will wonder where I am. Your clothes are still wet. I'll manage. She moved toward the screen, but Yates caught her hand. Josie, wait. She turned back, her expression a mixture of longing and apprehension. What, Yates? What can you possibly say that will make this situation any less impossible? I don't know. He stood, still holding her hand. I just know that finding you again after all these years feels like a miracle, and the thought of losing you a second time is unbearable. You're not losing me, she said gently. I'll be right here, just belonging to someone else. The words hung in the air between them. Yates knew he should let her go, should step back and honor his commitment to Morgan. But instead, he found himself moving closer, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity. Yates, she whispered, a plea or a warning, he wasn't sure which. Tell me you don't feel it too, he said, his voice rough. Tell me you don't lie awake at night remembering how it was between us. Tell me you don't wonder what might have been if we hadn't been kept apart by a lie. I can't tell you that. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. But it doesn't change anything. We're not those children anymore. No, we're not. He reached up to touch her face, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. We're adults who understand exactly what we're feeling, what we're risking. For a moment, she leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. Then, with visible effort, she stepped back. I need to go, she said, her voice stronger now. This isn't right, Yates. Not to Mr. Morgan, not to ourselves. She disappeared behind the screen and emerged moments later in her still damp dress, her hair hastily pinned up. Without looking at him, she moved to the door. Thank you for the use of your clothes, she said formally, as if speaking to a stranger. I'll see you at supper. Then she was gone, running through the rain toward the main house, leaving Yates standing in the doorway of his cabin, watching her go and wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life or narrowly avoided it. The days that followed were a strange dance of avoidance and forced civility. Josephine threw herself into learning about the ranch, spending hours with Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen or the garden, helping with the endless tasks that kept the household running. Yates immersed himself in ranch work, riding out at dawn and often not returning until after dark, exhausted enough that sleep came quickly despite his troubled thoughts. When they did interact, it was with careful politeness, never acknowledging the storm of emotions that lay just beneath the surface. Mrs. Abernathy watched them with shrewd eyes but made no comment beyond an occasional muttered "Lord have mercy," when the tension grew particularly thick. A week after Morgan's departure, a telegram arrived from Denver. His brother's condition was more serious than initially thought. The broken leg had become infected, and the doctors were concerned about blood poisoning. Morgan would need to stay at least another 2 weeks, possibly longer. Poor Mr. Morgan, Josephine said when Yates delivered the news. He must be so worried. They were standing in the kitchen, Mrs. Abernathy bustling around them preparing dinner. Yates had just returned from town, dusty and tired from the ride. "He asked me to apologize to you for the delay," Yates said, keeping his voice neutral. "He said to tell you that the wedding will proceed as soon as he returns, if that's still your wish." Something flickered in Josephine's eyes, uncertainty, regret, but her voice was steady when she replied. "Of course. Please tell him in your reply that I understand completely and that his brother's health must come first." Mrs. Abernathy snorted softly, earning a sharp look from Josephine. "I'll send a telegram tomorrow," Yates said. "Is there anything else you'd like me to tell him?" "Just that. That everything is well here. That he needn't worry." Yates nodded and turned to go, but Mrs. Abernathy's voice stopped him. "Mr. Caldwell, you look dead on your feet. Sit down and have some coffee before you fall down." The housekeeper pointed imperiously to a chair at the kitchen table. "Miss Miller, pour the man some coffee while I check on my bread." Josephine hesitated, then moved to the stove where the coffee pot simmered. She poured a cup and brought it to Yates, who had obediently sat down. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and both pulled back as if burned. "Thank you," Yates murmured, focusing on the steaming liquid. Mrs. Abernathy bustled out to the summer kitchen where her bread was baking, leaving them alone. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy with unspoken words. "You're working too hard," Josephine said finally. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." He sipped the coffee, welcoming its bitter warmth. "The work needs doing. Not all by you. The other hands could help more. They're busy with the North herd. We've had some trouble with rustlers near the border." Josephine's eyes widened in concern. "Rustlers? Is that dangerous?" "It can be. That's why I've been riding the boundaries myself." He set down the cup. "I don't want to worry Morgan with it if I can handle it. But you could be hurt." The genuine fear in her voice made him look up. Josephine was standing rigid, her hands clenched at her sides, her face pale. "I'm careful," he assured her, "and well armed. That doesn't mean you're invincible." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Yates, promise me you won't take unnecessary risks if something happened to you." She trailed off, but the emotion in her eyes completed the thought more eloquently than words could have. Yates felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by guilt. He had no right to that look in her eyes, no claim on her concern. "I'll be fine," he said again, standing. "I should get cleaned up before dinner." He moved to leave, but Josephine caught his arm. "Yates, please be careful. I couldn't bear it if the back door opened and Mrs. Abernathy returned, carrying a tray of freshly baked bread." Josephine dropped her hand from Yates's arm and stepped back, her face flushing. "That bread smells wonderful, Mrs. Abernathy," she said, her voice too bright. I'm sure Mr. Caldwell is looking forward to it after his long day. The housekeeper looked between them, her expression knowing. I'm sure he is, though a man needs more than bread to sustain him. She set the tray on the counter. Dinner in 30 minutes, Mr. Caldwell. Don't be late. Yates nodded and left, feeling Josephine's eyes on his back as he walked out. He returned to his cabin and washed the trailed dust from his face and hands, changed his shirt, and tried to compose himself for another evening of pretending he wasn't in love with his employer's fiancée. As he walked back to the main house, he noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Another summer thunderstorm was brewing, bringing back vivid memories of Josephine in his cabin, wearing his clothes, her hair down around her shoulders. He pushed the thoughts away. That way lay madness. Dinner was a strained affair with Mrs. Abernathy carrying most of the conversation, updating them on the garden's progress and the latest gossip from town, which she had heard from the delivery boy who brought the mail. Josephine responded politely but seemed distracted, while Yates focused on his food, contributing only when directly addressed. After dinner, Mrs. Abernathy announced she was retiring early with a headache. "You young people don't need an old woman hovering," she said with a significant look at Josephine. "Perhaps you could show Mr. Caldwell those books Mr. Morgan ordered for you, Miss Miller. I believe he was interested in the one about horse breeding." Before either could protest this transparent maneuver, the housekeeper had disappeared upstairs, leaving them alone in the parlor. Josephine stood awkwardly by the fireplace, while Yates remained near the door as if preparing for a quick escape. "Mrs. Abernathy is not subtle," Josephine said with a small smile. "No, she isn't." Yates shifted uncomfortably. "I should probably go. I need to be up early tomorrow, always running away." There was a hint of challenge in her voice. "Are you afraid to be alone with me, Yates?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "I am." His candor seemed to surprise her. "Why?" "Because every time I'm near you, I want what I can't have." He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "Because I respect Morgan too much to betray him, but I'm not sure my resolve is strong enough to withstand temptation. And I'm a temptation." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. "You know you are." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Josie, this is torture. Seeing you every day, knowing what might have been, what could still be if circumstances were different. If I weren't promised to another man." She stated it plainly, a fact that couldn't be changed. "Yes." The first rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, and rain began to patter against the windows. The storm had arrived. "I've been thinking about that," Josephine said, moving to the window to watch the rain. "About my promise to Mr. Morgan." Yates felt his heart rate accelerate. "What about it?" "He asked me in his telegram if the wedding was still my wish." She turned to face him, her expression troubled. "It was a curious way to phrase it, don't you think? As if he sensed my hesitation. Morgan is perceptive." "Yes, he is." She took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I can go through with it, Yates. Not now. Not knowing what I know about us, about the past." Hope and alarm warred within him. "Josie, think carefully. Morgan has offered you security, respect, a good life. I can't promise any of that. What can you promise?" Her eyes held his, demanding truth. "Love," he said simply. "I can promise to love you every day for the rest of my life, just as I've loved you for the past 12 years, even when I thought you'd forgotten me." She moved toward him slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "That's all I've ever wanted from you, Yates. Just your love." They stood facing each other in the center of the parlor, the storm raging outside mirroring the tumult of emotions within. Yates knew he should step back, should remind her of her commitment, should honor his loyalty to Morgan. But when Josephine reached up to touch his face, he couldn't move away. "I've dreamed of you," she whispered. "Every night since I arrived, I dream of what might have been, of the life we could have had." "Josie," he murmured, his resolve crumbling, "we can't." "I know," she lowered her hand. "But I can't marry him, Yates. not loving you as I do. It wouldn't be fair to any of us." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Yates wanted to pull her into his arms, to kiss her as he'd been longing to since the moment he saw her step off the train. But honor held him back. "What will you do?" he asked. "I'll tell him the truth when he returns, that I can't marry him because I'm in love with someone else." Her voice was steady now, certain. "He deserves honesty at least. He'll know it's me. Yes, he might fire me. We might both have to leave. I know." She lifted her chin. "I'm prepared for that." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. The storm was directly overhead now, violent and powerful. "We should check the windows upstairs," Yates said, practical concerns temporarily overriding emotional ones. "This storm looks bad." Josephine nodded, and they moved through the house together, making sure all the windows were secure against the driving rain. In Morgan's study, they found one window had blown open, rain soaking the papers on his desk. "I'll close it," Yates said, crossing to the window and fighting against the wind to secure it. "Can you save those papers?" Josephine hurried to the desk and began gathering the wet documents. As she sorted through them, her movements suddenly stilled. "Yates," she said, her voice strange. "Look at this." He joined her at the desk and looked at the paper. She was holding a half-written letter in Morgan's neat handwriting. It was addressed to Josephine. "I shouldn't be reading his private correspondence," she said, but she didn't put the letter down. Yates read over her shoulder. "My dear Miss Miller, I find myself in a difficult position as I write this. When I placed my advertisement for a mail-order bride, I did so with honest intentions. I am a lonely man in the autumn of my years, seeking companionship and perhaps a measure of happiness in my remaining time. Your letters convinced me you were a woman of intelligence, grace, and character qualities I greatly admire. I believed we could build a life together based on mutual respect and shared purpose, if not passionate love. However, circumstances have changed in a way I did not anticipate. I have observed the way you and my foreman, Caldwell, look at each other. It is a look I recognize, having once experienced it myself with my first wife, many years ago. It is the look of two people who share a deep connection, a bond that transcends ordinary friendship. Caldwell has been loyal and circumspect, as I would expect from a man of his character. You have been unfailingly polite and attentive. Neither of you has behaved in any way that could be deemed inappropriate. And yet, the truth is as clear to me as the stars on a cloudless night. I am therefore writing to release you from our arrangement. I cannot in good conscience proceed with a marriage when your heart clearly belongs to another. I would not condemn us both to such unhappiness. Please do not think I hold any ill will toward either you or Caldwell. Life is too short for bitterness and love too precious to deny when it appears, however inconveniently. My brother's accident provides us all with time to consider our paths forward. When I return, the letter ended there, unsigned and unfinished. Josephine set it down with trembling hands. "He knows," she whispered. "He's known all along." "And he was going to step aside," Yates said, amazed by Morgan's generosity of spirit, "even before you told him the truth." They looked at each other, the implications sinking in. The obstacles that had seemed so insurmountable were dissolving before their eyes. "What do we do now?" Josephine asked. Before Yates could answer, there was a tremendous crash from outside. They rushed to the window to see that lightning had struck one of the large cottonwood trees near the barn. The tree was ablaze despite the rain, and as they watched in horror, a burning branch fell onto the barn roof. "The horses!" Yates exclaimed, already moving toward the door. "And the hay stored in the loft if the fire reaches it. I'll help," Josephine said, following him. "No, stay here. It's too dangerous." But she was already grabbing a rain slicker from the hook by the door. "I'm coming with you. Those horses need everyone's help." There was no time to argue. They raced out into the storm, the rain hitting them like needles driven by the wind. "Mrs. Abernathy appeared on the porch in her nightgown, alerted by the commotion. "Fire!" Yates shouted to her over the storm. "Ring the alarm bell." The housekeeper nodded and disappeared inside. Moments later, the clanging of the large bell mounted on the roof began, its urgent pealing carrying across the ranch, summoning any hands within hearing distance. Yates and Josephine reached the barn as the first flames began to spread across the roof. Inside, the horses were whinnying in fear, some kicking at their stalls in panic. Yates immediately began opening stall doors, while Josephine grabbed lead ropes from the tack room. "Get them out to the corral," Yates directed, handing her the first horse, a gentle mare who seemed less panicked than the others. "Then come back for more if you can." Josephine nodded and led the mare out into the rain. Yates continued freeing the horses, speaking soothingly to them despite the chaos around them. Above, the fire was spreading, and he could hear the ominous crackle as it began to consume the hay stored in the loft. He had just freed the last horse, Morgan's prized stallion, when a burning beam crashed down near the door, partially blocking the exit. The stallion reared in terror, nearly knocking Yates over. "Easy, boy, easy," Yates murmured, trying to calm the panicked animal. "We're going to get out of here." Outside, he could hear shouts as the ranch hands arrived, organizing a bucket brigade from the well to the barn. Josephine appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Yates, are you all right?" "Stay back," he called. "The roof's coming down." As if to emphasize his words, another burning beam crashed down, showering sparks. The stallion reared again, and this time Yates lost his grip on the lead rope. The horse bolted, not toward the door but deeper into the barn where the fire was spreading rapidly. "No." Yates ran after the stallion, dodging falling debris. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to see or breathe. He found the horse backed into a corner, eyes rolling in terror. "Come on, boy, this way." He approached slowly, hand outstretched, speaking in low, calming tones despite the urgency of the situation. Finally, he managed to grasp the lead rope again. As he turned to lead the stallion out, he saw that their path was now blocked by flames. "Yates," Josephine's voice came through the smoke. "The back door. Use the back door." Of course, the smaller door at the rear of the barn, used primarily for bringing in hay from the fields. Yates changed direction, leading the frightened stallion through the smoke toward the back of the building. They reached the door just as another section of the roof collapsed behind them, sending a wave of heat at their backs. Yates pushed the door open and led the stallion out into the rain. They were on the far side of the barn from the house, with the burning tree between them and the others. He could hear shouting, but couldn't make out the words over the storm and the roar of the fire. As they circled around to rejoin the others, Yates saw that the bucket brigade was making progress. The rain was helping, and the worst of the fire seemed to be contained to the roof and one side of the barn. With luck, they might save part of the structure. Josephine ran to him as soon as she saw him, throwing her arms around him, heedless of the mud and soot that covered him. "I thought you were trapped," she said, her voice breaking. "When that beam fell, I'm all right," he assured her, returning her embrace briefly before remembering where they were, who might be watching. He stepped back. "We need to get this fellow to the corral with the others." Together, they led the stallion to the corral where the rest of the horses had been gathered. The ranch hands were still fighting the fire, and Mrs. Abernathy was organizing blankets and hot coffee for the soaking wet men. It took another hour of hard work, but eventually the fire was extinguished. The barn was badly damaged, but not destroyed the stone foundation, and much of the framework remained intact, though the roof would need to be completely rebuilt. Miraculously, No people or animals had been seriously injured, though one of the hands had suffered minor burns and Yates had a nasty cut on his arm from falling debris. As the adrenaline of the crisis faded, exhaustion set in. The ranch hands dispersed to their bunks, and Mrs. Abernathy, after fussing over Yates's injury and bandaging it, retired to her room. Josephine insisted on helping Yates check the horses one final time to ensure none had been injured in the panic. They stood together in the rain-soaked corral, watching as the horses settled, the immediate danger past. Dawn was still hours away, but the storm had moved on, leaving behind a gentle rain and occasional distant rumbles of thunder. "You could have been killed," Josephine said softly, watching Yates's face in the dim light from the lantern they carried. "It would take more than a barn fire to get rid of me," he replied, attempting lightness but not quite succeeding. "Don't joke about it." Her voice was sharp with lingering fear. "When I saw that beam fall and you didn't come out—" "I'm sorry," he said, suddenly serious. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "I realized something in that moment," she continued, her eyes fixed on his face. "When I thought I might lose you again, this time forever. I realized I can't wait anymore, I can't pretend. Life is too short and too uncertain." "Josie, no, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I've loved you since I was 16 years old, Yates Caldwell. I never stopped, not for a single day. And I'm tired of letting circumstances and misunderstandings and other people's expectations keep us apart." She stepped closer, her face tilted up to his, rain glistening on her skin. "I don't care what happens when Mr. Morgan returns. I don't care if we have to leave here, if we have to start over with nothing. As long as we're together, I'll face whatever comes." Yates felt something break loose inside him, the last restraint, the final barrier. He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his calloused fingers. "I love you, Josephine Miller. I have always loved you, and I will love you until my last breath." He leaned down, hesitating just a moment. "Are you sure?" "Once we cross this line—" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered, and lifted her face to his. Their lips met in a kiss that was both new and achingly familiar, a homecoming and a beginning all at once. Yates pulled her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of her that had haunted his dreams for 12 long years. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Josephine smiled up at him with such radiant joy that it made his heart ache. "We should go inside," he said reluctantly. "You're soaked through and it's been a long night." She nodded but made no move to leave the circle of his arms. "What happens now, Yates? When Mr. Morgan returns, we tell him the truth," he replied, though it seems he already knows. "We offer our apologies and accept whatever consequences come." He touched her cheek gently. "Together." "Together," she echoed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. By day, Yates supervised the repairs to the barn while Josephine helped Mrs. Abernathy with the household and tended to the injured ranch hand. They maintained a careful distance in public, aware of the scrutiny of the other hands and the all-seeing eyes of Mrs. Abernathy. But in the evenings, after the household was quiet, they would meet sometimes by the creek that ran through the property, sometimes in the small grove of trees beyond the orchard. There, they would talk for hours, filling in the missing years of their lives, rediscovering each other as adults while remembering the children they had been. They spoke of their dreams for the future, perhaps a small ranch of their own someday. Children with Josephine's golden hair and Yates's dark eyes. They were careful never to cross certain boundaries, both aware that until Josephine was formally released from her commitment to Morgan, anything more than kisses would be a betrayal. Telegrams came regularly from Denver. Morgan's brother was improving slowly and Morgan expected to return within the week. With each passing day, the moment of reckoning drew closer. "Are you afraid?" Josephine asked one evening as they sat side by side on a fallen log by the creek, their hands intertwined. Of Morgan's reaction. Yates considered the question. Not afraid, exactly. Ashamed, yes. He's been good to me, and this feels like poor repayment. I feel the same way, she admitted. But would it be better to go through with a marriage based on a lie, to live a lifetime of pretending? No. His answer was immediate and certain. That would be crueler in the end. They fell silent, listening to the gentle murmur of the creek and the evening chorus of crickets. "I found something today," Josephine said after a while, "when I was helping Mrs. Abernathy clean out one of the storerooms." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was in a box of things belonging to Morgan's first wife. She opened the locket to reveal a miniature portrait of a young woman with a sweet, serious face. Her name was Elizabeth, Mrs. Abernathy says they were childhood sweethearts who married young. She died in childbirth their first year of marriage, along with the baby. "I didn't know," Yates said softly. "Morgan never speaks of her. Mrs. Abernathy says he loved her more than life itself. That he's never really gotten over her loss, even after all these years and 2 more marriages." Josephine closed the locket gently. "I think that's why he recognized what was between us. He remembers what real love looks like. And why he was willing to step aside," Yates added. "He wouldn't want to stand in the way of that kind of love, having experienced it himself." The knowledge made Yates feel both better and worse about the situation. Better, because he believed Morgan might understand. Worse, because it highlighted the depth of their deception, however unintentional. The day of Morgan's return dawned clear and warm, a perfect late summer day. Yates had received a telegram the previous evening confirming that Morgan would arrive on the afternoon train. He rose early, as usual, but instead of immediately beginning his chores, he sat on the step of his cabin and watched the sunrise, mentally preparing himself for the conversation ahead. He and Josephine had agreed they would speak to Morgan together, taking equal responsibility for the situation. They would offer to leave immediately if that was his wish, though the thought of abandoning the ranch that had become Yates's home was painful. The day passed with agonizing slowness. By mid-afternoon, Yates had changed into his best shirt and was hitching the wagon to drive to town to meet the train. As he worked, Josephine appeared, also dressed in her best, a simple but elegant blue dress that matched her eyes. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We should face him together from the start." Yates nodded, admiring her courage. "It's going to be all right," he said, though he couldn't be sure of that. "I know." She touched his arm briefly. "Whatever happens, we're together now, that's what matters." They drove to town in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The train was on time, its whistle announcing its approach as they arrived at the station. They stood together on the platform, a respectable distance apart but united in purpose. The train pulled in with a hiss of steam and a screech of brakes. Passengers began to disembark, and then there was Morgan, looking tired but relieved to be home. He spotted them immediately, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Josephine, whom he clearly hadn't expected to meet him. "Mr. Morgan," Josephine greeted him, stepping forward. "Welcome back. I hope your brother is recovering well. Miss Miller." Morgan tipped his hat, his eyes moving between her and Yates with a knowing expression. "This is a pleasant surprise. And yes, Thomas is on the mend, thank you." "Let me take your bag, sir," Yates said, reaching for the small valise Morgan carried. "Thank you, Caldwell." Morgan relinquished the bag. "I see you two have been getting along in my absence." There was something in his tone that made Yates look up sharply. Morgan was watching them with an expression that wasn't anger or hurt, but rather a kind of resigned understanding. "Sir," Yates began, "there's something we need to discuss, not here," Morgan interrupted, glancing around at the busy platform. "Let's go home first. We can talk there." The return journey was awkward, with Morgan asking polite questions about the ranch and expressing appropriate concern about the barn fire. Neither Yates nor Josephine mentioned the unfinished letter they had found, nor did they give any indication of the change in their relationship. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Abernathy greeted Morgan with obvious relief and immediately ushered him into the house, announcing that dinner would be ready in an hour and he should rest until then. Morgan agreed, but not before giving Yates and Josephine a significant look. "Join me in my study in half an hour," he said. "Both of you." The half-hour passed with excruciating slowness. Josephine changed out of her traveling clothes while Yates put away the wagon and horses. They met on the porch and walked into the house together, their steps in perfect unison despite their nervousness. Morgan was waiting in his study, seated behind his desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He gestured for them to sit in the two chairs facing him. "I believe there's something you want to tell me," he said without preamble, his eyes moving between them. Yates and Josephine exchanged a glance, and then Josephine spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Morgan, I cannot in good conscience proceed with our marriage. I have developed feelings for another man, and it would be unfair to you to continue with our arrangement under these circumstances." She took a deep breath. "I am deeply sorry for any pain or inconvenience this causes you, and I will, of course, make arrangements to leave as soon as possible." Morgan nodded slowly, then turned his gaze to Yates. "And you, Caldwell, what do you have to say?" Yates sat straight in his chair, meeting his employer's eyes directly. "Sir, I have betrayed your trust, and for that I am profoundly sorry. I never intended for this to happen, but I can't deny my feelings for Josephine. I love her, and I have for many years, since we were children together in Ohio." "I suspected as much," Morgan said, leaning back in his chair. "The way you looked at each other from the very beginning. It reminded me of something I once had." He picked up his whiskey glass but didn't drink. "I found it curious that you never mentioned knowing each other before." "We were afraid you would misunderstand," Josephine said softly, "that you would think we had planned this somehow." "Did you?" "No." They spoke in unison, then looked at each other with a small smile that confirmed their connection more eloquently than words could have. Morgan watched them, his expression softening. "I believe you, and in truth, I had already come to a decision before I left for Denver." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the letter they had found during the storm, now completed and signed. "I was going to give you this upon my return." Josephine took the letter with trembling hands. "We saw the beginning of this during the storm. The window blew open and your papers got wet. We were trying to save them when we came across it. I apologize for reading your private correspondence." "No apology necessary. It saved me having to write it again." Morgan smiled slightly. "My sentiments haven't changed. You're not angry?" Yates asked, still not quite believing their luck. Disappointed, perhaps. Miss Miller would have made a fine wife. Morgan's eyes crinkled at the corners. "But I've lived long enough to recognize true love when I see it, and I'm not so selfish as to stand in its way." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch that had been his life's work. "I married my first wife, Elizabeth, for love. My second marriage to Caroline was a partnership based on mutual respect and companionship. It was a good marriage in its way, but it never touched what Elizabeth and I had." He turned back to face them. "I wouldn't condemn any of us to a pale imitation of love when the real thing is within reach." Josephine rose and impulsively took Morgan's hand. "You are a good and generous man, Mr. Morgan. I hope you know how much we both respect and admire you." "I do know that," he patted her hand. "And I hope you know that I wish for your happiness, both of you." Yates stood as well, overwhelmed by Morgan's grace. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Thank you seems inadequate." "Then say you'll stay on as my foreman," Morgan replied pragmatically. "Good help is hard to find, and you know this ranch better than anyone except me. You want me to stay, Yates couldn't hide his surprise. Even after. Why not? You're the best man I've ever had working for me. Unless you have other plans. Yates and Josephine exchanged a glance. They had discussed leaving, starting fresh somewhere else, but the thought of staying, of building their life together here on the ranch they both loved, was tempting. We would be honored to stay, Josephine said, answering for both of them. If you're certain it wouldn't be awkward. Life's too short for awkwardness, Morgan said with a dismissive wave. Besides, I'm not getting any younger. In a few years, I might be ready to sell this place. I'd rather it go to someone who loves it as much as I do. He gave Yates a meaningful look, something to consider for the future. Before either could respond to this remarkable suggestion, there was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Abernathy appeared to announce that dinner was ready. The conversation was postponed, but the seed had been planted, a vision of a future together on the land they both loved. 3 weeks later, Yates stood in the small church in Willow Creek, watching as Josephine walked down the aisle toward him. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. She had never looked more beautiful. John Morgan stood beside Yates as his best man, a role that had raised eyebrows throughout the town, but which seemed perfectly natural to the three of them. The minister, who had been hastily briefed on the unusual situation, conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth. Do you, Yates Caldwell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Yates said, his voice strong and clear, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face. And do you, Josephine Miller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Josephine replied, her smile radiant. With all my heart. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that had been Morgan's wedding gift to them. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates bent to kiss his bride, sealing their vows with a promise that had been 12 years in the making. The small reception was held at the ranch, with the hands and neighbors gathering to celebrate. As the afternoon turned to evening, Yates found himself standing on the porch with Morgan, watching as Josephine danced with one of the younger ranch hands. You're a lucky man, Caldwell, Morgan said, sipping his whiskey. She's a remarkable woman. I know it, Yates agreed. I still can't believe she's my wife. Believe it. Morgan clapped him on the shoulder. And never take it for granted. Love like that is rare. I won't, Yates promised. And thank you again for everything. Not many men would have been so understanding. Not many men have loved and lost as I have. Morgan's eyes took on a faraway look. Elizabeth would have approved, I think. She always believed in true love conquering all. He smiled slightly. Rather romantic notion, but in your case, it seems to have proven true. Josephine joined them then, breathless from dancing. What are you two discussing so seriously? This is a celebration. Just imparting some wisdom to your new husband, Morgan said with a wink. Though I suspect he won't need much advice when it comes to making you happy. Josephine slipped her arm through Yates's, leaning against him in a way that still thrilled him with its casual intimacy. I think we'll manage quite well, she said, smiling up at her husband. As the party continued around them, Yates took a moment to marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point, from that first innocent kiss under the oak tree in Ohio, through 12 years of separation built on a lie, to the shock of their reunion at the Willow Creek Depot, and finally, to this moment of perfect happiness. Life in the Dakota Territory was still hard, still unpredictable. There would be challenges ahead, harsh winters, the constant work of the ranch, perhaps children someday with all the joys and worries they would bring. But Yates knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 10 years later, Yates Caldwell stood on the porch of the main house of the Caldwell Ranch, watching as the stagecoach wound its way up the long drive. Beside him, Josephine bounced their youngest child, 2-year-old Elizabeth, on her hip, while their older children, 8-year-old John and 6-year-old Rebecca, pressed against the porch railing in excitement. "Is that him, Pa?" John asked, squinting against the afternoon sun. "Is that Grandpa Morgan?" "I believe it is," Yates confirmed, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "Remember your manners now. Grandpa's been traveling a long way." John Morgan had officially sold them the ranch 5 years earlier, moving to a smaller property nearby where he could enjoy his retirement in comfort, while still being close enough to visit regularly. He had become a beloved fixture in their family, a grandfather to their children in every way that mattered. The stagecoach pulled to a stop, and the driver helped Morgan down. At 73, he moved more slowly than he once had, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and he still sat a horse better than men half his age. "Grandpa!" The children rushed down the steps to greet him, nearly bowling him over in their enthusiasm. Morgan laughed, bending to hug them both. "My, how you've grown, John. You're nearly as tall as your father was at your age, and Rebecca, pretty as a picture, just like your mother." Yates and Josephine followed at a more sedate pace, Elizabeth waving shyly at Morgan from the safety of her mother's arms. "Welcome home, John," Josephine said warmly, leaning in to kiss his weathered cheek. "How was Denver?" "Noisy, crowded, and entirely too fashionable," Morgan grumbled, but his eyes twinkled. "But my brother sends his regards. He's thinking of moving out this way next spring. Says the mountain air might be good for his old bones." "He's always welcome," Yates said, clasping Morgan's hand firmly. "The guest cabin is his whenever he wants it." They made their way to the house, the children chattering excitedly about all that had happened in the month. Morgan had been away, the new foal in the stable, John's progress with his reading, Rebecca's skill with her new pony. Morgan listened to it all with genuine interest, asking questions and offering praise in all the right places. As they settled on the porch with coffee and the apple pie Mrs. Abernathy had baked in honor of Morgan's return. The housekeeper had elected to stay on when the ranch changed hands, declaring that the Caldwell children needed a proper grandmother figure. Yates looked around at his family with a deep sense of contentment. The ranch had prospered under their stewardship, expanding to nearly twice its original size. The barn, rebuilt after the fire, was now one of the finest in the territory. The house had been expanded as well, with additional bedrooms for the children and modern conveniences that made Josephine's life easier. But more important than the material success was the love that filled every corner of their home. Yates watched as Josephine helped Elizabeth with her slice of pie, her golden hair now streaked with a few strands of silver, her face still as beautiful to him as it had been when they were 16. She caught his eye and smiled, a private look that still made his heart race after all these years. Later, after the children were in bed and Morgan had retired to his old room, which was always kept ready for his visits, Yates and Josephine stood together on the porch, looking up at the star-filled Dakota sky. "Happy?" Yates asked, drawing his wife close against the evening chill. "Completely," Josephine said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life, that we found each other again after all those years." "Maybe it was meant to be," Yates suggested. "Maybe all those years apart were necessary for us to become the people we needed to be for each other." "The philosophical cowboy," Josephine teased, poking him gently in the ribs. "Next you'll be writing poetry." "Only for you," he said, bending to kiss her. "Always for you." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the stable, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. You ever think about that day at the depot? Josephine asked suddenly. When I stepped off the train and saw you standing there. Only every day, Yates admitted. The shock on your face mirrored exactly what I was feeling, like seeing a ghost, but the best kind of ghost one that brought back everything good from the past. I thought I was dreaming at first, Josephine said, or that my mind was playing tricks on me. It seemed impossible that you would be there in that exact place and time. And yet, here we are. Yates gestured to the ranch spread out before them, their home, their legacy. All because my mother tried to keep us apart, and John Morgan placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride, and you were brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. And because you were honorable enough to let me go, even when you knew you still loved me, Josephine added. Everything had to happen exactly as it did for us to end up here. Well, when you put it that way, Yates said with a smile, I guess I'm grateful for every moment, even the painful ones. They all led us home. Home, Josephine repeated, looking up at the house that had witnessed their journey from forbidden love to family. Yes, that's exactly what this is. As the night deepened around them, Yates Caldwell held his wife close, thinking of the long, winding path that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. From a first kiss under an oak tree, to a shocked reunion at a frontier depot, to a love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its way. It had been worth every step of the journey.